Here's a question for you. What's the most important part of workplace safety? Is it rules, regulations, engineering, leadership? Well, today's guest, Frank Engli, believes that none of those things matter unless you have a culture of care.
Moving from punishing way of looking at safety to a more caring and collaborative method.
Frank Engli has 38 years of experience in oil and gas, and he's watched the culture go from a situation of crime and punishment to people actually looking out for each other and trying to make sure that they intervene in unsafe acts and do the right thing.
We all have to look after ourselves, but we also owe a certain amount of care and collaboration with our coworkers.
It's a great conversation where we talk about leadership and culture and really the growth of an industry over an almost 40-year period. So whether you're a safety professional, an industry leader, or you just really care about leadership and people's safety, today's episode's for you. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the Bridge Podcast. Frank Engli, thank you so much for joining me today on the Bridge. It's great to have you on here. I'm looking on LinkedIn and all I see is you're standing up in front of crowds and you've got a pile of experience and you're moderating different events. And what inspired you to have the career that you have?
Basically just, got out of engineering school, got into, working in the oil and gas field and energy field, and then got an opportunity to do a presentation at a conference. Basically, since then, it seems to be I've hit the conference circuit and everybody seems to like listening to me.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. So how many events are you doing a year?
Generally about 4.
A
year. The Calgary Shutdown Conference is the big one that was just held last week here in December. And then there is one on the Gulf Coast that I participate in. Then there's one with the petrochem folks and one in Europe that I've been involved with.
And how many years of experience before you started getting involved in all this conference stuff?
2006, a colleague of mine was asked to speak at the conference in Calgary. And unfortunately, due to time commitments, he couldn't do it. So he offered my name up. And since then, I haven't looked back.
What do you do to prepare?
Mostly just basically laying down a PowerPoint note, lay out my thoughts and discuss it. And really just more, I don't read through notes. I do make some, key things to key off of. But mostly just sharing what I know and the topics that people ask me to present on.
Yeah, I feel like with 38 years experience in oil and gas, you probably have a lot of experiences you can draw on in terms of keeping people informed, entertained, and interested in what you're talking about.
Well, I have my fair share of scars.
Yeah. Yeah, good way to put it. Why oil and gas?
When I graduated from school back in 83, I was always interested in aerospace, and actually I ended up going to get my master's because we couldn't find jobs at the time, and wanted to get into that area, but the economy was a little slow at the time and oil and gas was hiring, and I ended up starting first off in the industry. And if anybody remembers Ontario Hydro, I'd actually worked in the nuclear division for a bit, and then on to Sarnia with Imperial Oil, and then moved on to Shell later in my career.
Amazing. It's funny how the years pile on, and all of a sudden you look back and there's
they catch up quicker with you than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a success story from your years in the field, something a good story that you enjoy.
Well, I've had some really interesting times. One of the things that I really enjoyed with is, taking a different approach to safety and really applying sort of moving out of the traditional way safety was being done. I had just moved to Shell and they had a problem there. So we were looking for something different. Came across through one of the contractors we were working with a program that they were engaged with a consultant called JMJ. It was almost like you wish kind of if I could have articulated my thoughts as similar to the way they were teaching it, it would have been great. But it was moving from basically punishing way of looking at safety to a more caring and collaborative method. We took their teachings, but also then took it a step further by really looking that, we had a call to action because our safety wasn't doing well and we had other issues going on. And if you remember, this is back in the 2012, 2013 mark. The Alberta economy was really going strong. And so trying to attract people to your site was always a challenge. And so we had to look at things a little bit differently as to how we go about doing it.
So is this around about the time the 12 life-saving rules were established and all that kind of stuff with Shell, or
This
is
was
it?
after that because, well, depending on the organization, if you were at with the cardinal rules or life-saving rules, and some people had 8, others had 12, those were established. But again, my experience was it started in the early 2000s. One of the interesting things that was identified to us with the people we were working with at the time was, the focus on those life-saving rules when we shared them with people at orientation sessions or we talked to them about safety meetings, it was, thou shalt do this, and if you don't, you will be punished.
Yeah.
And again, it was this very strict adherence. But what they had identified to us, well, you're going about it wrong because there's a reason why these rules are applied. And people may not necessarily understand it. So if you think about the life-saving rules, you have to be tied off and wear the proper PPE and de-energize everything. But the reason they were put in place was because a lot of these organizations over the time, they had actually lost people and perished because they didn't follow the rules. And the issue was why the organizations, and again, my experiences in oil and gas, why they created these was because these were things that when they didn't have these, cardinal rules or life-saving rules, people were perishing. And again, the way it was presented to the workforce was, if you don't do it, you will be punished, as opposed to the reason why we're doing this is because people perished before.
Yeah.
And so we're not here to, try to pull your chain and make your life miserable. What we're here to do is protect you. And moving from that approach to why you're doing safety as opposed to enforcing safety.
I think that's such a common theme that I come across with people that actually care about safety. I was with Shell after the life-saving rules were established, and I remember the numbers of people dying, and it was like, for us, it was LSRs. Before the LSRs, I think it was like 51 people annual. And within a few years, it was down to 1 to 0. I mean, there would be the occasion, and I mean, one's too many, but you've got 1 million people working, worldwide with Shell. So the numbers were pretty significant.
Well, it's an interesting thing is that, somebody like Shell, they still have some fatalities, but a lot of that is associated with, transportation, road traffic and things like that.
Yeah.
But, it moved from being where they had a lot of fatalities at job sites to where, nowadays they have very, very seldom. And even just in terms of the way we think about things, I remember, if you remember when Toronto International Airport was being built, there was basically at that time, because of big construction, they said they anticipated that there would be some fatalities. Yet in the oil and gas industry, even back in early in those times, nobody even thought in those terms. So everything's moving, to a much, safe aspect, but there's still some challenges, and it's keeping people on board and really, getting the hearts and souls to people to understand that these rules, these way we go about doing things is not there to make your life difficult. It's because without those, you actually end up creating, serious situations where people get hurt.
Yeah, agreed 100%. A friend of mine that I had on not so long ago said that he didn't want to send people away to another site to die. So if you break one of these rules, that's made in blood. These things are written in blood because people get hurt, and that's why they're made. But you don't correct the behavior, then you're literally just giving this problem to somebody else and hoping for the best.
Yeah, and again, we tend to talk about the negative all the time, but most everybody does want to work good and really want to do a good job, and they want to be safe because they've got their loved ones and associates, things that they cherish. And if you view the world like that, then yeah, the few and the ones that are, can't comply, you decide to part ways. And I agree with your friend there. You don't want to send them off to another area, but there's a point where, if a person's not going to be able to follow along and take on that culture, he's endangering themselves and others.
100%. 100%. Old football player, you get rid of the cancer sometimes. Like you have to, right? You got to cut it out, right? What kind of common misconceptions do you find around people when they're talking about safety in the industry?
Well, I think everybody, a couple things is that one is that people really don't come to work to try to work safe. They try to, shortchange it. But no, everybody comes to work to do well and to look after themselves and their fellow workforce. The other one is that companies don't care about people's safeties. I mean, it's there may be organizations out there, but as the majority of organizations that I've been involved with in oil and gas in Alberta and basically across North America, safety is the primary thing. Now, the depth of safety companies have really goes to being extremely very conscious and very concerning about it. And I was fortunate to be able to work with one, whereas others may, shall we say, placate it. But I've been very fortunate that I've worked for a number of companies that safety was predominant and also allowed us to do things a little different to get that safety aspect across to people.
So you feel like there's more caring about it from both sides, from leadership down and from field up.
There is. It's just how some organizations go about it. It's in the DNA of some organizations to be more dictative than to be collaborative, and that varies across the organization. I think the industry is changing. I think people's experiences are changing, and they're more better understanding. Generationally, we've changed over. People with thick heads like myself are moving on. It's now the newer workforce. It's been entailed in the trade schools and the school and technical schools about that. That is a predominant thing that everybody needs to be able to look for. And again, it's not safety as an individual; it's the collective safety aspect to it.
Okay, expand on that.
So the issue is that we all have to look after ourselves, but we also owe a certain amount of care and collaboration with our coworkers, because the reality is that no one's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. One of the things you have to create a work atmosphere where if I point out to you you're not wearing your earplugs or you're not properly tied off, you don't take offense to it, that I'm trying to antagonize you. I'm there because I care and I want to make sure that you've got it. And if you mutually work together that way, then you can pick up on all the things that could occur. And looking after the small things is, just as important as the big things. Because if you collectively look at the small things, the big things tend to get taken care of. And again, it was an analogy I used. If you remember, there was a rock band at one time that used to have the M&M's bowl.
Yes.
That you have to have the brown ones picked out, and you wonder and sit there and say, man, those rock stars are nuts. Well, no, it wasn't the rock stars who created that request. It was the road manager. From the legend, or the way the story goes, is that any type of these contracts they put together and they went to a venue, there was a lot of things to be prepared. And the last thing he had on that contract to be prepared was a bowl of M&Ms with the brown ones picked out. Doesn't matter the color. But when he went into the hotel room and he saw that there, or to the venue that they were at and saw that there, he knew somebody went through and got all those things ready.
Oh,
and again,
that's smart.
Right? And so that was his leading indicator on how to ensure that the things that they needed to be successful. So you think about it when we are out in the field and we bug people and sit there, you're not wearing your ear protection or you may be missing your gloves. The reason why we're doing that is a similar thing. So if you're taking care of the small things, the big things tend to get taken care of, right?
Yeah.
Or if we do observations in the field, it's making sure that if the small things are being taken care of, likely, and the correlation is fairly consistent, is the big things are being addressed. Because you're not letting things slide. So that issue around, well, you didn't have your glove, somebody called you out on it, but the aspect that maybe I'll just reach over and not tie myself off just to get this tool this one time, now you start creating that culture where it's that expectation. Then the other one is in terms of, making sure that you're looking after your folks. It's a two-way street. We as, in terms of clients or management, we tend to sit there and say what we want, but not necessarily follow up on what may be requested. So, and a big lesson I learned, and again, this is everybody uses safety cards, right? And if you have a thing, you submit your cards, and we're following along with the traditional, maybe during a turnaround or on day-to-day maintenance, you receive maybe 5 week or maybe 50 during a turnaround, and you'd follow up on them and you'd take care of them. But again, when we were working with this consultant, they said, well, what if you really looked after those cards? And so we put the challenge out and said, well, if you give us our safety card, we're going to get back to you with an answer in 24 hours. We did that with the exception of one leak in a trailer. I couldn't get that leak fixed properly. It just kept on reopening. But that's on a different side. Is what it did was it changed the dynamic. So people, you get these cards with little things on it, and you followed up and you told people this is what we're doing. I may give you an answer. You may not like the answer, but I'll give you an answer. So people understood that if I did my time and gave you this, I respected it, and I give you an answer back. And so that changed the dynamics where now people looked at these cards. Okay, things are getting done. So now let's try this a little more. And eventually it started moving everybody to a point where, okay, well, I really don't need to put this card in. If I need to put a fire blanket over a hot valve because it could be a potential pinch point or a touch point, they would do it on themselves, not necessarily wait for anybody else to do it. So you're freeing that up and then reinforcing to people that, you can just stop the job whenever you want if you don't feel it's safe, or you can adjust the job to make it safe without any problems. So there were sometimes you'd get incidents and, people would sit there, what held you up? Well, we went away and got this. And, you just basically accepted it and said, yeah, okay, that's what we asked you to do. So it's fine. The other one was moving towards this caring and collaborative approach where if a person had an incident, we as leaders would go in and talk to the person and we would only talk about one thing. How are you? Have we taken care of you? Is there anything else we can do? Oh, by the way, we're going to have an investigation afterwards, but we just want to learn. And again, it's moving from a punishing organization to a learning organization and then helping people through that process. And sometimes it was interesting because the contractors would think, well, you just want that person off our site now. And no, we want to do the investigation, bring them back because we want to learn from this. And it changes the dynamics. And again, as I had said before, is if you believe we all do our best, we're going to have brain farts and we're going to mess up sometimes. But let's learn from it and not necessarily punish people for that. And if there are people there who just, can't seem to get into this new culture, then we'll part ways. But otherwise, it moves everybody to a point where, then you start looking out for yourself. We actually, started in our orientation to talk about, okay, how do you actually work together? So how do you intervene to one another so that people don't look at it as an obstacle, or that somebody's, a Boilermaker goes up to, a scaffolder and says, you're not tied off properly. Well, just say thank you and tie off, as opposed to don't, look at it as he's just trying to bug you. Right. And actually, I've had some very interesting situations where one gentleman wasn't tied off. Another trade came by and said, you got to be tied off. He said, I don't have a harness. And he gave him his harness. And later that day, that individual did actually fall and was protected. Yeah. And you Amazing. Think by the grace of God, if that didn't occur, that person could have been seriously hurt. So when you start, and as I said earlier, when you start getting everybody caring about one another, then it becomes A, contagious, and B, the many eyes approach.
I love it. You know what? There's so much there, from follow up all the way to boots on the ground and care and concern. I remember we used to train when I was with Shell. I did a lot of adult education stuff, and it was, how do you start an intervention? What's the first thing you say? How about hello?
Oh, yeah.
Because people don't even know how do you start it? Well, hi, how are you today? What's going on? How can I help you? Do you have any safety concerns?
And we did the same thing, where we ended up, we ended up doing things like, leadership always goes out and says, we're going to do a tour of the area and make sure that, people are working safe. And two things is, one is, well, you got to make sure that the tours get scheduled everywhere, because everybody goes through and looks at, and I'm going to use the term, the sexiest job, whether you're replacing something or doing something big. And then everybody at that job gets stopped 2 or 3 times because somebody's on a tour. And the second one is the individual who's going out there as a senior manager, well, I'm going to make sure they're wearing their earplugs. Well, that's not your role. Your role is to figure out why that person isn't wearing it and what in your current operating system is preventing that, or where's the fault and how can you correct that? So again, moving towards that, let's look at the overall aspect, and each of us play a role in it. And like you had said, is you don't, you're out on a tour, you don't want the guys are slugging in the field and you sit there and you want to stop them and say, well, you didn't fill this, yellow tag out on the ribbon that you circled off. And he goes, no, guys, just let them work. When the break comes, talk to them. Hey, by the way, things are really going good. You guys are really slugging there. The way you fitted the plate up is great. But next time you're, putting the ribbon up, make sure you fill the car out, right?
Yeah.
And so it's focusing on the positive that, we're all going to make a miss, or respectfully is, I used to wear glasses before I had cataract surgery, and I'd rush out from the trailer and I'd forget my safety glasses. I'd still have my old glasses on. And people were afraid of approaching me because, oh, you don't have your safety glasses, and they thought I'd chew their head off. Maybe in the past I would have. But again, I learned myself to sit there and say, oh, thanks. I'll go back to the trailer and I'll go get my glasses, and away we go. And again, it changes the whole atmosphere. And then when you build that caring and collaborative atmosphere, and again, the way you have to do it is you've got to work with all the parties. You can move into other things too. And what I mean by working with all the parties, we worked as a client and with contractors and with the building trades themselves, and got together and formed a tripartite where we talked about these kind of things. And through each one of the leadership discussed, okay, what are the pluses? What are the minuses? What are you doing or we're doing wrong? Or what are things that are throwing everything off that, this is our intent, but here are the barriers that are keeping us from getting there. And then slowly knocking them off and building that relationship and that trust, where if you came up to me and said, well, your safety people out there are not doing this right, or by the way, every time somebody comes through our area, it's a different person and we don't know who's who in the zoo. So we said, oh, okay, well, maybe if we assign one person in one area and he became a buddy for that team or for that area, and then he can come in and say, like you said, say hello, but now, hey, my name's Frank and I'm going to be back here tomorrow. And then, if they asked any questions around what's going on, are we on time or not, then you could talk and people were curious and they could find out. Or if something did occur, they could get information. Nothing's worse than, many organizations don't want to share anything until the full investigation is done. And the reality is, all we really need to do is A, person was hurt, B, we're taking care of them, and C, the area is secure. We'll follow up with you guys after the investigation. But if you don't do that right away, people then start getting curious or worried, and then the rumor mills go.
Yep.
And
I like the idea of having the same person out there, because you talk about follow-up. I mean, throughout this, we've talked about follow-up. How can you have follow-up if you don't have some consistency with the people?
Anything from, and again, this is not only the worker in the field, but it's with the supervisors. Well, you get a guy in the field says, oh, by the way, I drive in an hour to the site, and by the time I got on the bus after having my Tim's double, extra large, can you put a porta potty out by the parking lot? Why not?
Yeah. How important is it to do that right away too? Like,
exactly.
How important is it that gets
next
done?
Day it's out there, and then you're like, oh, okay, these guys are listening to me. And
he's actually doing what they say they're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
and
huge.
So, and that's that, like that, that issue around the 24 hours, you're listening, and then people know, okay, you're ready to respond. And even if when you have to give them answers where maybe you don't necessarily like it, people will accept it, because everybody knows, it's not a matter of you can do everything. There are certain things that you can't do. But as long as you're honest, and then you build that honesty and that relationship, people will accept you for it.
That's great, Frank. Thank you. That's great information. What do you have for advice for young men and women who are looking for a job in safety in your industry?
First off, always take it an approach of, and again, it's a caring and collaborative approach. You're there to help. A, the individuals in the field, or B, the organization and the supervision that's trying to get things done. To say, you got to stop the work and then go away, figure out how to do it safely is not. You got to be a part of the team. You're not the police, and you got to work together. If you see an unsafe act or something that is not legit, you need to bring it to people's attention, formulate and get the right people together, and find an action plan to move forward versus just saying, no, it's no good. You got to stop, go figure it out, and then walk away. It's really carrying that. The other one is there's lots of experience and lots of knowledge, and there's different ways of skinning the cat. And, in terms of the preventative things is, can you engineer it out? I mean, relying on PPE is your last line of defense. So if you can get involved early in the planning and preparation, is then start looking at what are the possibilities, and never look at it as, wow, we can't do this. Is it more focus on what we can do? So, can I improve the ventilation to reduce the need for PPE? Can I basically use different materials if there are certain things like, if you're using solvents that could, create some sort of industrial hygiene issues? And ask those questions and really look at the possibilities as opposed to the limitations.
I love it. I just think it's so important for young safety professionals, especially. And I know I was at fault of this early in my career, is shutting work down, and you know what, shutting work down without having an answer how to start it up again, or shutting work down and not having the answer before you even get out there.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously sometimes it's time sensitive. Sometimes you got to do it, but
Yeah,
you better help them rebuild it.
Yeah, and I have to reinforce it is, never be afraid to shut down the job, no matter who you are, let alone a safety person. Is, if you see something that is wrong or you don't think is right, and this goes back early in my career, back when I was out in the East Coast, we were, using a skiff and basically taking internal trays out of a vessel, and we had built a cantilever scaffold. And the idea was that the scaffold would basically be suspended above it. But what we didn't realize was that they were actually setting the skiff or the bin on top of the scaffold. And it was just a young laborer who was a safety watch. He just said, "Is this safe? Has this been designed for that kind of load?" And he stopped the job. And then, people came, and a couple people were a little grumpy. But, and I said, but you know what? I don't have the answer for that. And we looked into it, and we talked to the scaffold company, and they had their engineer and look at it and very quickly said, no, we never intended that to occur.
Amazing.
It's as simple as interesting as that. And so those kind of insights that people have, and sometimes it's the people that don't necessarily have the experience, but are basically inquisitive and ask the right questions, you can then sit there and say, yeah, maybe I'm not quite clear about that. Maybe I need to go take a look.
Yeah, I think it's so important to be able to ask questions, and you brought up the right to refuse unsafe work too, just in this conversation, and it should be stressed that in Alberta, it's not even a right; it's an obligation.
Yes.
In the rest of Canada, it's a right. What's the difference to you if you hear the difference between the right to stop unsafe work or the obligation?
Well, the obligation it's the same thing as I had said before. We're there to look after ourselves, but also everybody else. The right to refuse is basically you're looking out for yourself. The obligation to stop unsafe work is an obligation to everybody. And that, being that, as we had said, and you're in the heat of the battle, you're doing something, you're caught up, you may not see it, or it just basically you're so busy, you just can't absorb all the information that's surrounding you. And somebody comes up and says, oh, by the way, that does not look good. Or have you checked this out? And you sit there and say, well, maybe we should. But that person's coming in is not tied up either in the schedule or the work or the I'm going to say the energy involved when you're executing work. And they ask the question, and if nobody has the answer, then maybe it's time to pull back. But that's an obligation for all of us to do.
I like it. So it's a commitment.
And the obligation doesn't necessarily carry in through at work. It's everywhere we go. I had an incident back when I was on the East Coast. I was in a Canadian Tire and I was shopping, and this young man was on top of a 12-foot step ladder and standing right at the top. And I asked the gentleman to come down, and I, said, "You're not supposed to do that." His supervisor or manager came over, and they politely waved me off, and I could hear them mumbling as I walk away. Next morning, I get up. There was a store out there, similar, Kent, similar to Home Depot, and unfortunately, that evening, those forklifts that they have in like Home Depot that they reach up to the rack, a young fella wasn't tied off. Something happened, fell and perished.
Wow.
And you sit there and say, I wonder if if somebody had intervened on that individual the same I had intervened on that person on the ladder, would they still be around?
Yeah.
So, it's that not just at work, it's everywhere, everything we do. So, if your grandpa says do the safety eye squint when he's cutting away at wood, well, maybe.
Did you know my grandpa?
I think we all have that kind.
Yeah, it was actually my dad, but we do our best. It's funny.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, one last question here. Give me 3 rules that you would hope that your kids would know before they move out of the house. Your 3 rules that maybe your parents taught you, 3 rules about life and success and love, whatever you want.
Oh, that's a tough one. Never be afraid to phone home and ask a question, or, because there's no such thing as dumb questions. The other one is never turn down a challenge unless you've thought through it. And again, it's that aspect of not saying I can't do it, is this is what I could do and this maybe I should. And the last one is you're not the only one in the room. There are others, and always take into their considerations.
Awesome. Frank, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, I appreciate your opportunity here to talk with you and your audience. And
you have a wealth of knowledge and something that it's very valuable. So thanks for sharing it, and I look forward to seeing what we do with this.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.